Now let's listen to Stewart and Keith discuss the options and their recommended approach to this difficult problem.
All right, Stewart Albertson here with Albertson and Davidson.
And hi, I'm Keith Davidson.
And Keith, we've had this hypothetical that we went over. You read it beautifully, thank you.
Thank you.
And then we had these various options. I was dying to know as I was going through the options, what are your thoughts? Did I pick the right options? Do you disagree with how I viewed the case?
Well, I don't necessarily disagree with the way you view the case, but I'll tell you that we run across this a lot, right? So you have a trustee who steps into office and for whatever reason they decide, number one, they think they can do whatever they want as if they were the parents, which that's not how it works. And number two, they have a lot of animosity towards Lupe because she lived in the house for a long time rent-free, and for whatever reason, that really has gotten under Miguel's skin. There's not a whole lot Miguel can do about that. You can't really go back and force Lupe to pay rent for 10 years. It's not going to happen. But you do have a trustee who's being very partial, and trustees have a duty to be impartial. The one thing that I probably would not do right away is the accounting. I think the accounting's not really necessary just yet. I think the more interesting thing is trying to either get Miguel to move and make a decision that's a proper decision, or get him out, just get him removed. And so it seems like either the petition for instructions or the petition for removal are probably your two best bets. And you could file that at the same time. The only problem is with removal, it's going to take a while, right?
And we've got Carlos and Damian who are chomping at the bit to get their money.
Right.
And so they're going to come in and side with whoever wants to do this more quickly. Well, if we file the petition for removal, then you've got Miguel telling his brothers, Carlos and Damian, Lupe's slowing this down, she's causing problems, and then possibly they take his side in all this. So that's why I stayed away from the removal. Now, you do know, obviously, that courts around California, they're all different.
Right.
So if I were telling you that this case was in San Mateo County currently as the current judge who sits there versus, let's say, San Diego County, would that change your opinion on whether you file for removal?
It might. I mean, San Mateo County tends to be very tough on fiduciaries. And so I think both the petition for instructions and removal might get better traction there. San Diego, I think, is tough on fiduciaries too. But for example, I don't think they're as tough as San Mateo. Los Angeles, for example, let's say we filed it in Los Angeles. It's a big courtroom, big county, a lot going on. You may or may not get removal. It depends. They have a number of different judges there as opposed to the other counties. San Mateo has one probate judge. San Diego has two. LA has many. And so you're not quite sure what you're going to get. So the where you file does have an impact on this, no doubt. I guess you're right. I mean, removal is a little bit of it's a tricky proposition because it can take time. But what about, would you bring just the petition for instructions, or do you like the idea of bringing the petition to sell real property and kind of forcing Miguel's hand?
I like bringing it in the alternative. So if I was advising the client, I'd say, let's bring a petition for instructions and ask the court to do what you're asking it to do, and that is to distribute the family home to you as an in-kind distribution. It's fair because it meets your amount of what you're going to be getting. Mm-hmm. Or in the alternative, Your Honor, sell everything and let's get a distribution. And now I think you've got Carlos and Damian on your side. So now everybody's looking at Miguel and they're seeing that he's the one slowing this down. And why is he slowing this down? Because he, the trustee, wants to favor himself over the other beneficiaries. The court's not going to like that. And it doesn't matter if that's in San Diego, Los Angeles, or San Mateo. And by the way, I think when you said that the San Diego court may not be as hard on the fiduciary as maybe San Mateo is, I think the way that I'd characterize that is they'll be hard on them. It's just it's going to take longer for them to be hard because they're going to want to have an evidentiary hearing because they're a big court. They've got a lot of cases. Yeah. Where the San Mateo judge takes a real keen interest, the current judge there, who we like very much, takes a real keen interest in these cases, and he seems to remove trustees quite liberally. And that's why I was saying, just from a strategic standpoint, if we're filing in San Mateo, since we know that particular court and that judge does certain things, whereas San Diego's, they're going to, listen, if you can prove to a San Diego judge that Miguel here has breached his duties and has caused damage to the trust, they're going to nail him just like any other court system will.
Absolutely, and I think all the judges that we appear in front of are great judges, but you have to remember that probate court's a court of equity, and what that means is that every judge has the authority and the right to make a decision based on how they see the law and the facts of the case. And every person's different, and it doesn't matter who it is, they're always going to see it a little bit different.
That's right.
And so there's going to be a difference in terms of result. Not ultimately, I think you're right. It's not necessarily going to be a different in result, but it's just a difference in the process and how long it takes and all these things. But I really kind of like the idea of putting it to Miguel and saying, you know what, we've changed our mind. We don't want the house. Just sell everything. And that may not be what Lupe wants. Lupe might actually want the family home. But if you were to reverse it, you kind of paint Miguel into a corner and say, forget it, sell everything. Because you know that he doesn't want to sell everything. You then make him you kind of force him to have to say, no, wait, I don't want to do that. Let's work out something else.
Right.
I mean, it's that leverage point that's so important, I think, in these cases, because otherwise, how do you get through to Miguel? I mean, what about just sending him a letter and saying, Miguel, you're doing this all wrong?
Yeah, letters don't work. We don't send letters. You got to pick something that's going to get action from the trustee. And here, because strategically, you've got Carlos and Damien that they're the fly in the ointment. They're causing problems. Is fly in the ointment?
Yeah.
Is that what it is? It's fly in the ointment? Okay. They're the ones causing problems. If Carlos and Damien were not in this case, hey, well, now it's a different ball game.
Why is that?
Because now, if Lupe's got time, now we may be bringing a petition for instructions that includes a petition for an accounting, a petition for removal, a petition for damages, and a petition to sell the real estate.
Okay, so you're seeing Carlos and Damien as being something that has to be managed separate from Miguel, and we have to be a little bit careful about it because we don't want them going against us.
Correct. If they go against us, it's going to look bad for us. Here, we want them to join us, and we want Miguel to feel isolated. Mm-hmm. We want Miguel to realize that he either has to give us the home, which is a fair distribution. He shouldn't be the trustee. If he wants it for himself, resign, turn it over to another trustee.
Right.
And let that trustee determine who gets what.
Well, that's kind of the interesting thing about this case, isn't it? Is that he shouldn't be trustee and he shouldn't be acting impartially. And yet, so you would think, oh, okay, so you go for trustee removal. And yet we're saying that's the last thing you want to do in this case. And it's all strategic, isn't it? I mean, in another case, that might be the first thing you want to do.
That's right. What would be better, and this is something that we've done more recently in the last few years in our litigation, is we've looked at the differing beneficiaries and figured out where their interests lie, and we've tried to create our petitions to be in line with their interest, even though we don't represent them. And that's what we're trying to get at here, because if we get Carlos and Damien on our side, and it doesn't matter how many Carlos and Damiens there are out there, we get those other beneficiaries on our side, I found that good things happen.
So you may actually be able to get Miguel either removed or neutralized because you get the assets out, and you probably can get Lupe the house, even though you're not necessarily going for getting Lupe the house right out the gate. You're doing some other things to try and position the case into that result.
One other thing that we're trying, and it's frustrating to me that lawyers can't settle cases anymore, right? Yeah. If we want to settle a case, we got to hire a mediator for $10,000 and go spend a day and go through all the rigmarole. I would like very much if we could get back to the days before you and I even started practicing law, where we hear some of the older attorneys, they miss those old days where they used to have lunch with other lawyers and they would resolve cases, right? But wouldn't it be nice if we could get with Miguel's lawyer and sit down, and maybe even in Carlos and Damien, if they're not represented, and invite them to the meeting and just see if there's any common ground we can find between the 5, 6, or 7 of us. Maybe you find some common ground. More than likely you're not, but at least take a stab at it. You're always going to learn something from one of those meetings, and then that can help tailor the strategy for your case moving forward.
Well, that's a really good point. One of the things I would say is that on a case like this, if you file your lawsuit and you start going after Miguel, hopefully what you want to see is Miguel goes out and hires a competent trust attorney.
Yes.
Because if he does, that attorney is going to tell him, Miguel, you've got problems here. We got to get something worked out. And sometimes you can work these out outside of mediation. It's not very often. But even if you can't, at least a good trust attorney advising Miguel is going to tell Miguel, you've got problems here and we need to do something about it. Unfortunately, there's a lot of times when Miguel will go out and hire somebody who doesn't know trust law at all, and that just pours fuel on the fire.
It does.
And Miguel gets into more trouble. And at the end of the day, we're still going to get what we want for Lupe because we're in a very strong position. And Miguel might have to pay money out of his pocket because he did everything wrong. Who knows?
That's right. Ultimately here, I think we both agreed based on this certain fact scenario, the sooner we can get a result from the judge, the better.
Absolutely.